Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the Cold War. We're talking about a 45-year global standoff that really did pit two superpowers against each other and, honestly, shaped the very world we live in right now. We're going to break down how it all started, how it was fought, and why, even today, its legacy is so important.
Okay, so think about this. The United States and the Soviet Union, they fought side by side to defeat the Axis powers in World War II. They were allies. But the second the celebrations were over, that alliance just crumbled. It was replaced by this deep, deep suspicion and a brand new struggle for global dominance. So the question is, how did it all go so wrong so fast?
So the story really kicks off in the rubble of World War II. The old European powers were just exhausted, which left these two new superpowers to fill the vacuum, the USA and the USSR. But here's the thing, their partnership was always one of convenience, not shared values. A totally new kind of struggle was about to get started.
And that's why it was called a Cold War, right? Because the two main players never actually went to a hot war with each other. With the terrifying new power of the atomic bomb on the table, both sides knew that a direct fight would probably mean the end of, well, everything.
At the absolute heart of this whole thing were two completely opposite visions for how society should even work. You had the US champion in capitalism and democracy, all about individual liberty, and on the other side, the Soviet Union was dedicated to spreading communism, where the state controlled pretty much everything. And these weren't just different policies, we're talking about fundamentally incompatible ways of seeing the world.
And what's so wild is that the writer George Orwell actually coined this term Cold War way back in 1945, before the conflict was even really a thing. He saw this future where nuclear-armed states would be locked in this permanent, hostile standoff. I mean, what a chillingly accurate prediction.
This famous phrase from Winston Churchill, the Iron Curtain, it just perfectly captured the stark division of the continent. You had the West, the US-led democracies, and the East, the Soviet-dominated communist states. And this wasn't just a line on a map, It was a real barrier made of minefields and barbed wire and just a whole lot of mistrust.
So this ideological split, it very quickly hardened into these huge military blocs. It wasn't enough to just disagree anymore. Both sides started gathering allies and building massive armies, basically getting ready for a fight they hoped would never come.
So in 1949, the US and its allies form NATO. It's a defensive pact. The whole idea is an attack on one member is an attack on all of them. The Soviet Union's answer to that came in 1955 with the Warsaw Pact, its own military alliance. And just like that, the world was officially split into two massive armed camps.
But it's fascinating because not every country actually picked a side. We talk about the First World, that's the US and its allies, and the Second World, the Soviet bloc. But there were so many newly independent nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that just rejected this whole idea. They formed what was called the Third World, or the non-aligned movement, trying their best to stay neutral.
Okay, so if direct war is way too dangerous, what do? Well, you compete for influence in other ways. And let me tell you, those ways were often pretty brutal. The Cold War became this global chess match, where every single region of the world was a potential square on the board.
And this is where we get the term proxy war. These became the main battlegrounds of the Cold War. Instead of fighting each other directly, the US and the USSR would just arm, fund, and advise opposing sides in local conflicts. They turned civil wars and revolutions into these huge global showdowns. And these conflicts, from the hills of Korea to the jungles of Vietnam and the mountains of Afghanistan, they cost millions and millions of lives. For the people actually living there, believe me, the war was anything but cold. These were devastating, full-scale wars, all fueled by superpower money and weapons.
And the rivalry just exploded way beyond the battlefield. I mean, the space race wasn't just about science, right? It was a cosmic duel for who is top dog in technology. In the shadows, you had spies from the CIA and the KGB waging a secret war. And everywhere, both sides were blasting out propaganda to sell their ideology and paint the other side as the enemy.
But under all of this competition, there was this constant, terrifying fear. I think the most defining thing about the Cold War was the knowledge that at any given moment, it could literally end all life on Earth. This led to this terrifying but kind of logical doctrine they called mutually assured destruction. And yeah, the acronym is MAD. You can't make this stuff up. It's the paradoxical idea that kept the peace.
As both sides built up these insane nuclear arsenals, they both knew that launching a first strike would absolutely guarantee their own destruction.
And this whole theory was put to the ultimate test in October 1962. The U.S. discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. For 13 unbelievably tense days, the world was closer to nuclear war than it has ever been, before or since. One wrong move, and that would have been it.
So after decades of all this tension and all these near misses, the Cold War didn't end with a big bang. It ended with this sudden, dramatic collapse that almost nobody saw coming.
Yeah, by the 1980s, the Soviet system was in deep, deep trouble. All those decades of massive military spending and a super rigid economy, it just led to stagnation. So a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, he realized something had to change. He introduced these two landmark reforms, glasnost, which means openness, and perestroika, which is economic restructuring.
But Gorbachev's reforms, they unleashed forces that even he couldn't control. In 1989, you see these popular movements just sweep across Eastern Europe, and it all culminates in the incredible, symbolic fall of the Berlin Wall. Just 2 years later, the Soviet Union itself, the engine of the whole Eastern Bloc, voted to dissolve. And just like that, the Cold War was over.
So even though that rivalry is history, its consequences are still very much with us today. Military alliances like NATO, they still exist. Thousands of nuclear weapons are still out there, and so many of the world's conflicts really began as these proxy battlegrounds. It makes you think the Cold War may have ended, but its echo has never really gone away.